Welcome to the Exec Exchange, 15-minute podcasts in which a leader from the water sector shares a story with Dr. Piers Clark to inspire, inform, and educate other water sector leaders from around the globe. Today, my name is Dr. Jo Burgess, and this is a special Christmas episode in which our guest is Professor Don Cowan from the Department of Biochemistry, Genetics and Microbiology at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. Don is a polar explorer. Don, brilliant to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
For the folks that don't know you, who's Don Cowan and what takes him to polar regions?
I'm a professor at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. I went to the university at the age of 18 and never left. I got to go to Antarctica first as a student, as a pack horse field assistant back in 1977, and decided then that it was such a wonderful, magnificent, awe-inspiring place that I had to get back there someday. And I eventually did. 20 years later or thereabouts, I got the opportunity to return as a scientist and to start asking the sort of questions that scientists like to ask. We didn't just go to Antarctica, we went to the dry valleys of Antarctica, which are very special. They're deserts, very cold deserts, but they're genuine deserts. So although there's a lot of water there, it's all frozen. And that's been my focus for the last 25 years, the microbiology of this very extreme cold desert.
And when you're a scientist in the Antarctic dry valleys, what's your working day look like? Are you based in buildings? Is there a research base? Are you camping? What do your working conditions look like?
I work with the Americans and the New Zealanders, and their particular model is very much a field camp model. So you do a few days training in the nearest base, which is about an hour's flight away out in Ross Island. And then you get dumped with you and your colleagues and your ton of gear dumped on the sand somewhere in the dry valleys, and they fly away and leave you to it. And so a typical day, you set everything up, you set up your tents, depending on how sophisticated you are, how long you're going to be there. You set up your kitchen, you set up your toilet facilities, and then you live there. Antarctica is a difficult place to do experimental work. And so microbiologists like myself, we tend to focus very much on collecting samples that are going to go back to the laboratories for much more detailed work at things you can't do out in the fields. Basically, a day is very often shouldering a not too heavy pack, climbing the nearest mountain or walking up the nearest valley and returning after a reasonable breakfast 8 to 10 to 12 hours later with a much heavier pack filled with bags of sand.
Excellent. When you mentioned setting up camp, you talked about setting up the toilets, and that's one half of the water cycle that I'm particularly interested in. What do your toilets look like? And if you're working in a desert and you're pack holding everything in, does that mean you have to take water with you?
In the Antarctic, no, we don't take water in because there's always a source of water somewhere. You can chip ice off a glacial front. You can dig snow out of a snowpack if there's one handy. But a lot of the valleys have intermittent stream flows in summer. Remember, we only work down there in summer. Glacial melt produces ephemeral streams. They're normally frozen first thing in the morning. You've got to wait for them to thaw out. And then you can get sometimes slightly salty, generally slightly gravelly water. So water supply isn't a problem. If it's come from a glacier, it's 100,000 years old and it's absolutely clean. So no water treatment required, which is remarkable. It's one of the few places in the world where you probably don't need to do that.
Brilliant. But once you've drunk it, I mean, as soon as you give people drinking water, the first thing they do with it is make wastewater. What do you do with the waste when you're finished with it?
This is all bound up with the conservation and environmental protection protocols that override everything when you're working in Antarctica. Remember, Antarctica is so-called the last pristine continent, the one that hasn't been messed up by human activity. And although it's maybe hard to find a place where a human boot has never stood, it's still entirely possible. But the concept, as originally established in the treaty, a continent for peace and science, I think they said, was that scientists' work there should leave it in a form that is essentially unmodified so the next generation, or the one after that and one after that, can essentially continue that work without an anthropogenic influence of any sort. The implication for this then is that all waste, liquid, solid, human, grey water, and any other cooking material is bagged and shipped out. Reason that one therefore limits water use as much as possible. So you don't really wash when you're down there. Once every 2 weeks, I have a full bath in 500 mils of water. The reason, of course, is that every liter of water that you take from a stream or a glacial mass, melt, drink, or put in your food ends up in a container that has to be shipped out by helicopter The helicopters bring in 1,600 pounds of gear. They want to return everybody to base with 1,600 pounds plus or minus. They don't want 2,600 because you've got 10 enormous barrels of water because everybody had a shower.
Grey water and wastewater, of course.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so what do the toilets actually look like?
It depends on the camp you're in. If you're in a large, well-funded American camp, you've probably got a chemical toilet in a nice blue plastic box. In a very simple Kiwi camp, you have an orange plastic bucket, supermarket type bucket, 25 litre, with a wooden toilet seat sitting on top of it and a blue bag inside of it. The blue bags are very important. There's also a white plastic 22-litre barrel with a wide mouth funnel. So solid waste in the orange bucket and liquid waste in the white barrel. Solid waste, of course, it's cold enough so it freezes pretty readily. The bags are double sealed and shipped out in the rear cargo hold of the helicopter.
Brilliant. Where do they go once they're shipped? Do they get delivered to the local sewage treatment works? Do you know what happens to them once they've left Antarctica?
As I understand it, liquid waste can be disposed of in the sea, and solid waste is put onto the first cargo ship that comes down to the Ross Sea area and is shipped back to New Zealand for secure incineration. This is part of the conservation imperative, which is zero impact, particularly zero chemical impact on any environment you work in. You wouldn't dream of pouring the dregs of your coffee cup out on the sand. It's just would never be done, or it should never be done, because that would contaminate a piece of sand with some foreign material that's going to be there in 100 years' time. So very careful protection of liquids and solids. And what I've always found really quite inspiring was at least the teams I worked with buy into this concept absolutely and totally.
Excellent. If anybody in the audience is an overlander, a remote camper, that's something we should all be doing whenever we go into remote regions, no matter where they are, even if they're not pristine dry valleys at Antarctica.
It hasn't always been that way. The conservation imperatives have got much stronger in the last 40 years. So when I was there in 77, there was a much more liberal approach to waste disposal.
Oh, really?
Nobody really thought very much about it at that point. But the world's changed a lot in that time. Since the 80s, the conservation perception, of course, has developed enormously. Thank goodness.
Yeah, sounds like a major improvement. Don, that was really interesting. The majority of the population of the world haven't had the experience that you've had, and it sounds as though it's a set of insights that actually would carry through to not such special areas in a very real way, and we should take it all a bit more seriously.
You make a good point, actually, about the campsite. Undoubtedly, in camps around South Africa, is that people clean a camp and you don't leave anything on the ground. You take that to extreme in the dry valleys. When you clean the camp, you walk around the entire campsite looking for any visible thread from your clothing will be picked up and taken away. Anything that you can see. You hope to leave the footprints and the inevitable skin cells, which you can't do much about.
Can't do a lot about that. Yeah.
Unless they make us wear hazsuits. They do in specially protected sites. There's a group working right now, some friends of mine up on the top of Mount Erebus on the thermal steam heated soils of the top of a very high mountain. And they're all in hazmat suits, not with breathing gear, but completely white suited, leaving only the face exposed.
Interesting. Have you ever done that?
Worked in a hazmat suit? No. That's specific to very, very specially protected sites, which in fact, normally people are not allowed into or not even allowed to fly over them. You can, in fact, get special permission for special reasons to attend, but there are sites around the dry valleys in particular, and probably other parts of Antarctica, which are designed to be essentially kept pristine in perpetuity.
Good. They should. That's a good thing. I didn't know that, and it makes me happy. You have been listening to the Exec Exchange with me, Jo Burgess, and our guest today has been Professor Don Cowan from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. We've been talking about water use and waste management on polar expeditions. Thank you very much for joining us, and happy Christmas.